What I'd like to do is read the first few paragraphs of the decision, because Justice Alito has written just really powerful, persuasively, why this is the right call under the Constitution and under a lot of moral codes as well. So what I propose is that we go like paragraph by paragraph. There's like 6 pages and there's 2 paragraphs, so about 12, 14 paragraphs somewhere in there. And I'm hoping we can maybe do this in about 10 minutes. But I'd like some comments or questions on each paragraph, and then if it goes too long, I'm just going to cut off and keep moving. Does that work? Does that work for y'all?
It works.
Okay.
Can you explain the...
Yeah, I'll do. Okay, so the first thing to know for lay people is that what is a Supreme Court decision? The Supreme Court makes a decision, and its whole power is based on its reasoning. If it doesn't have any reasoning, then it doesn't have any lasting authority, right? So this decision is really tightly reasoned, and it gives me, like, I just had goose pimples coming home from Fargo, because this is just rock solid stuff that this guy has put together, and you'll see it's powerful prose. I mean, it's just persuasive for a regular person to listen to this. So it goes 212 pages. So lawyers go on a long time, and they cover every single little point. So the first 12 pages are just just the most important, the highlights. Okay, so that's what I'm going to try to give you. And so one paragraph at a time. So Justice Alito, he had 5 justices that joined in his result, 4 that joined in the opinion itself, and then Chief Justice Roberts said, "I agree with the result, but I don't like your reasoning." So that's why it's a 6-3 decision. The liberals will say it was 5-4, closely divided, but Roberts eventually went ahead and joined the other conservatives on the court. So it's really a 6-3 decision in the result, which is overturning Roe and okaying the Mississippi law that gave rise to this whole case. All right. So 6-3 is a pretty good result. So he writes, first paragraph: abortion presents a profound moral issue on which Americans hold sharply conflicting views. Some believe fervently that a human person comes into being at conception and that abortion ends an innocent life. Others feel just as strongly that any regulation of abortion invades a woman's right to control her own body and prevents women from achieving full equality. Still others, in a third group, think that abortion should be allowed under some but not all circumstances, and those within this group hold a variety of views about the particular restrictions that should be imposed. End of paragraph. So what's he doing?
Kind of giving you a setup.
He said, like, this is a mess. This whole thing is just a big legal mess. Like, there's people all over the map, right? So he's inviting himself and the others to make some clarity, which is really smart. And he's recognizing women have this view, right? So he's trying to give, I think, some feeling that they've been listened to, that the other side has been listened to, because he recognizes this is why people are in favor of abortion. They want the woman to control her bodies, right? And they want full equality. That's what is driving them. So he's trying to recognize that. So, next paragraph. Any questions there? Comments? Okay.
Then try to turn down a COVID shot.
Okay. For the first 185 years after the adoption of the Constitution, each state was permitted to address this issue in accordance with the views of its citizens. So this was always a state's issue. Like, each state could decide for themselves for the first 185 years of America. Then in 1973, this court decided Roe versus Wade. Even though the Constitution makes no mention of abortion, the court held that it confers a broad right to obtain one. It did not claim that American law or the common law had ever recognized such a right, and its survey of history ranged from the constitutionally irrelevant, for example, its discussion of abortion in antiquity, like what did the Romans do? That in Rome, they spent all this time talking about what happened in Rome and what the ancient Romans did. Like, that's their justification for their decision in Roe, right? And then he says, from the irrelevant, Roe is also to the plainly incorrect. For example, its assertion that abortion was probably never a crime under the common law. And we'll get into that a little bit later in the next paragraph. After cataloging a wealth of other information having no bearing on the meaning of the Constitution, he's talking about Roe, right? the Roe opinion concluded with a numbered set of rules, much like those that might be found in a statute enacted by a legislature. So the legislature passes the law, and it's all very detailed, the subparts and all that. That's what he's saying the Roe court did. They didn't interpret the Constitution, they enacted a statute in Roe. So he's saying this isn't even a legitimate constitutional decision. This is the court pretending to be a legislature. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
So next he's going to describe what this elaborate statutory scheme that the court imposed on us in Roe, what it did. Under the scheme of Roe, each trimester of pregnancy was regulated differently. But the most critical line was drawn at roughly the end of the second trimester, which at the time corresponded to the point at which a fetus was thought to achieve, and he puts in quote, viability, i.e. the ability to survive outside the womb. Although the court acknowledged that states had a legitimate interest in protecting, quote, potential life, unquote, it found that this interest could not justify any restriction on pre-viability abortions. The court did not explain the basis for this line, and even abortion supporters have found it hard to defend Roe's reasoning, because viability isn't in the Constitution. Like, where did this come from?
Yeah.
Right? It's just like they just made it up. One prominent constitutional scholar wrote that he would, quote, he would vote for a statute, like a legislation, piece of very much like this one that the court ended up drafting, if he were a legislator. But his assessment of Roe was memorable and brutal. Roe was, quote, not constitutional law at all, and gave, quote, almost no sense of an obligation to try to be constitutional law. So he's like mocking these people, like, you're not even pretending to do your job.
Yeah.
Like, it's just outrageous. You're just legislating from the bench. So he's undermining the legal credibility of what the court did in Roe. It said this is not what we do as justices. Comments, questions?
Boy, God gave him some insight.
In
Yeah.
legalese, they did a rectal extraction.
A what express?
A rectal extraction.
Gotcha. Well, there's some people with doctors that have to explain that to me later. Doctor degree. At the time of Roe, 30 states still prohibited abortion at all stages. How many of you remember when Roe was decided?
Yeah.
Remember where you were? I was in grade school and the nuns were crying all day long. It's like, right? Okay. In the years prior to that decision, about a third of the states had liberalized their laws, but Roe abruptly ended that political process. It imposed the same highly restrictive regime on the entire nation, and it effectively struck down the abortion laws of every single state. As Justice Byron White aptly put it in his dissent to Roe, he didn't go along with Roe. This is Justice White. He said the decision represented, quote, the exercise of raw judicial power, close quote. And it sparked a national controversy that has embittered our political culture for half a century. I mean, isn't this spot on? Like, these guys came in, they made this, they crammed it down our throats, and now we can't talk about it anymore, right? Because it's all decided, right? And like groups like this have proven it wasn't decided, right? We just kept fighting in spite of this. So it's like he's kind of saying, kudos to you guys, right? You didn't cave into this, which was just an arrogant, stupid approach to making the decision in the first place. Comments, questions?
Persevere, you guys. We need to persevere.
So Roe was 73, right? Eventually, he writes, in Planned Parenthood of Southeastern Pennsylvania versus Casey, which is a 1992 decision. So now we fast forward to 19 years. The court revisited Roe. I mean, they took another look at the abortion issue, right? But the members of the court split three ways. So what's he doing now? He's saying this is a mess. This is why we're saying it's a mess. Like, we had this decision, then it was revisited 19 years later, and nobody could even decide what was happening, what the rules should be. Two justices expressed no desire to change Roe in any way. Four others wanted to overrule the decision in its entirety, like, this is bad. We should just get rid of Roe, right? That was four. And the remaining three justices who jointly signed the controlling opinion took a third position. Their opinion did not endorse Roe's reasoning, because there wasn't any reasoning, right? And it even hinted that one or more of its authors might have, quote, reservations about whether the Constitution protects the right to abortion. So he's saying, like, even the people who initially imposed, like, they didn't think this was a very good thing, right? But the opinion concluded that stare decisis, you get an extra Scotch rule if you can tell me what stare decisis means. Bob Bewer.
Chewing.
She was Scotch first.
I'm
He's
sorry.
already having his.
Relying heavily on precedent.
Precedent, yeah, the thing decided. It's already decided, so you leave it alone. That's so society can predict what the law is, right? So the other opinion concluded that stare decisis required adherence to what Roe's central holding that a state may not constitutionally protect fetal life before viability, even though that holding was wrong. Like, yeah, we know it's wrong, we know it's stupid, but because it's decided, we're just going to keep going. That's what four of the people in Casey said 20 years later, right? Anything less, the opinion claimed, would undermine respect for the court and the rule of law. So Chief Justice Roberts super concerned about this. Like, he's concerned that the Supreme Court won't be legitimate because they pushed too hard. They pushed back too hard. And all the New York Times and all the liberals will say, like, this is not a legitimate Supreme Court anymore. Because they didn't get their way. Like, they lost one case and now they're going to take their ball and go home. Right? Yeah.
We're sorry we're wrong.
So then he writes, paradoxically, this is where his brilliance as a writer comes in. The judgment in Casey did a fair amount of overruling. So he's saying, even though they relied on stare decisis, on precedent, they're overruling precedent as they make this Casey decision. It's like, you guys aren't even following your own rules, right, that you're setting up. Several important abortion decisions were overruled in total, and Roe itself was overruled. So this is what a lot of people don't know, that Roe was overruled by Casey 20 years later, 19 years later, in part. Because they recognize this is just a train wreck. There's no reasoning behind it, right? So Casey threw out the whole trimester scheme, Roe's trimester scheme, and substituted a new rule of uncertain origin, like he's saying in nice words, where in the hell did this come from, right? Of uncertain origin, under which the states were forbidden to adopt any regulation that imposed a, quote, undue burden on a woman's right to have an abortion. So now they totally shifted from this trimester thing, not workable, not working, not legitimate, medically stupid, to now they create this new phrase, undue burden. You can't have an undue burden on abortion. That was Casey, right? And the decision provided no clear guidance about the difference between a due burden and an undue burden. No guidance, so what if the nation is just adrift, right? But the three justices who authored the controlling opinion called on the contending sides of a national controversy to end their national division by treating the court's decision as a final settlement of the question of the constitutional right to abortion. And Casey did that. Like, stop arguing about it. That's what Casey was trying to tell us. We've decided. Just accept our decision. So they changed the rules from Roe. This whole thing, they manufactured a whole new different reason, and now said accept it and stop arguing. That's what we've been living under. The judicial reasoning. As has become increasingly apparent in the intervening years, Casey did not achieve that goal. Americans continue, like Virginia Dolacek, to hold passionate and widely divergent views on abortion, and state legislatures have acted accordingly. Some have recently enacted laws allowing abortion, with a few restrictions at all stages of pregnancy. Others have tightly restricted abortion, beginning well before viability. And in this case, meaning the Dobbs case, 26 states have expressly asked the court to overrule Roe and Casey and allow the states to regulate or prohibit pre-viability abortions. So that's the mess that they're trying to clean up.
I'm
Right?
assuming North Dakota is one of those.
I think North Dakota joined now. Yep. Right? You can thank Wayne Stedman for that.
Yes.
Right. Well, and you can thank Virginia Dolacek for that too.
Yeah.
Before us now is one such state law. The state of Mississippi asked us to uphold the constitutionality of a law that generally prohibits an abortion after the 15th, this is important, after the 15th week of pregnancy, several weeks before the point at which a fetus is now regarded as viable outside the womb. So these people, these geniuses in Mississippi, they said, we're going to craft a law that makes the baby as human as possible, but it still has to violate Roe. So they served them up this big softball and said, here, if you want to overrule, just smash this thing. And that's exactly what it is. So whoever came up with this rule. This is really, really a great legal strategic thinker. Like the court wants to do this, we'll give them it, right? So it was crafted specifically to allow conservatives on the court to overrule a rule. That's what Mississippi did. In defending this law, the state's primary argument is that we should reconsider and overrule Roe and Casey, and once again, what? Allow each state to regulate abortion as its citizens wish. That was the rule before, right? In every state, North Dakota defines murder the way we want it to define. New York can define, like, if they want to say a baby can be alive for 10 days, and then you can kill it in New York, they can do that. That's what they could do before. It's a state law. It's up to the state to decide. On the other side, respondents and the Solicitor General. Who's the Solicitor General? He's Joe Biden's lawyer. He's the federal. This is our tax dollars at work. Our Solicitor General comes in and argues to the Supreme Court, and they ask us to do what? To reaffirm Roe and Casey. And they contend that the Mississippi law cannot stand if we do so. Allowing Mississippi, this is really good, to prohibit abortions after 15 weeks of pregnancy, they argue, would, quote, be no different than overruling Casey and Roe entirely. They contend that no half measures are available and that we must either reaffirm or overrule Roe and Casey. So, like, they're challenging. You can't go halfway. Either leave it alone or just gotta overrule it. And so what do we do? They overruled it. Like,
Thanks for asking.
yeah, exactly. Thanks for making it so easy. But the chief, in his concurrence, he says that this is what he wanted to do, was like do a half measure. Like, make sure that the Mississippi law is okay, but leave Roe alone. That's what Roberts wanted to do in his concurrence. That's what he doesn't agree with the decision, but he voted with it in the end.
How is he justifying?
He's justifying it just on politics. Like, the nation can't support this much change, and so we got to ease into moving away from abortion. Yeah.
It's not his job.
The right question. We didn't raise the question, and yet the Supreme Court should not respond to a question that is not been answered. So we didn't vote
Right. That's right. That's right, Julie. So we hold. So a holding means that this is what the case means. So if you go to law school, you study the holdings of a case. Like, this is what it means. Now, there's other comments that are made in a decision like this, like 213 pages. It's not all holdings. There's all sorts of stuff that aren't really vital to the main thrust of the conclusion. We call that dicta. So he's saying that we hold, like, this is really, really clear for lawyers and judges. Like, this is the holding, right? You can't confuse it. We hold that Roe and Casey must be overruled.
Yay.
And then he says, the Constitution makes no reference to abortion, and no such right is implicitly protected by any constitutional provision, including the one on which the defenders of Roe and Casey now chiefly rely, the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. So the 14th Amendment, you guys know what, I mean, it's kind of a complicated amendment, but it says that no state shall make a law that restricts the right of any citizen's right to liberty. You can't restrict or life, but they forget about you can't restrict someone's right to life. It's like you can't restrict their liberty. So how is that interpreted? That's what Casey is relying upon to say a woman has a liberty to do what she wants, and so she can have an abortion. She can kill her baby because that's liberty under the. And so people make all sorts of claims. This is the background of the 14th Amendment. People can make all sorts of claims about what liberty means. Like, we can all have different ideas of what liberty is, right? So the rest of this he'll stretch out is that there's principles for deciding, does this claim of liberty fall under the 14th Amendment or not, right? And he just decimates the argument. This is so stupid. Like, so that's what's so joyful about this for me. The Due Process Clause. That provision has been held to guarantee some rights that are not mentioned in the Constitution, but any such right must be, quote, deeply rooted in this nation's history and tradition, and implicit in the concept of ordered liberty. So it's got to be deeply rooted. If you're going to claim that this liberty thing is protected by the 14th Amendment, it's got to be it's got to go way back. Like, you've got to show that this is important to our country for a long, long time.
Mike, can you give us an example what one would be to prove that it was?
Well, he's going to give one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Well, he's going to give the opposite of one.
Oh, okay.
The right to abortion does not fall within this category. Until the latter part of the 20th century, such a right to abortion was entirely unknown in American law. The latter part of the 20th, it wasn't even known. So they're claiming this deeply rooted, and it was like not even present, right, for most of the country's existence. Indeed, when the 14th Amendment was adopted, 3/4 of the states made abortion a crime at all stages of pregnancy. So the left is saying, like, this is deeply rooted in our tradition. When 3/4 of the states said, "Bull, it's a crime." It's not deeply rooted; it's a crime.
Yes.
But that's what Roe is. That's what it's all based on. That's their claim to liberty under Casey, is that this was deeply rooted in our tradition. And the facts are that most states said this is you could go to jail if you do this, right? Indeed, when the 14th, the abortion right is also critically different from any other right that this court has held to fall within the 14th Amendment's protection of liberty. So now we're hearing all about gay marriage and all these other things that will be threatened by this decision. And so now he's distinguishing this and saying this is different. Roe's defenders characterize the abortion as similar to the rights recognized in past decisions involving matters such as intimate sexual relations, contraception, and marriage. But abortion is fundamentally different, as both Roe and Casey acknowledge, because, why? It destroys what those decisions called fetal human life, and what the law now before us describes as an unborn human being. Yeah. Exactly. Finally, we get it, right? Stare decisis, the doctrine on which Casey's concurring opinion is based, does not compel unending adherence to Roe's abuse of judicial authority.
Oh, yes.
Like they abuse the crap out of this, and we're just not buying it. It's got to go, right? Roe was egregiously wrong from the start. It's like just blunt, right? It was egregiously wrong, and the commentators have said this is really blunt. He says it was egregiously wrong from the start. Justices don't talk this way usually. It's like all this nice speak, and right. So this guy's really blunt. And then he says, its reasoning was exceptionally weak, and the decision has had damaging consequences. And far from bringing about a national settlement of the abortion issue, Roe and Casey have inflamed debate and deepened division. Last paragraph. It is time to heed the Constitution and return the issue of abortion to the people's elected representatives. Yeah. The permissibility of abortion and the limitations upon it are to be resolved, like most important questions in our democracy, by citizens trying to persuade one another and then voting. That is what the Constitution and the rule of law demand. And that's the end of the intro to the case. So he just goes on and fleshes all this out. So what is it in the end? What is it? It's a challenge. Like, it's up to you guys now. We have taken the heavy veil of a constitutional decision off, and it's fair game, right?
Mike, I have a question for you.
Yes.
Why do you think they picked Alito of the justices to do this? Do you have a feel for that?
You mean for life?
Right.
Okay. So the way that works is that the chief gets to decide if he's voting with them. So I believe that, so the chief wrote a concurring opinion, so he probably chose Alito. I'm not sure about that. If that's not the rule, then who decides, who writes? The senior most member of the court in the decision, in the majority, which would be Clarence Thomas, right? So
That's
Clarence
why
Thomas
I was
probably
expecting
decided.
it to
Yeah.
would be Clarence Thomas. So when Alito wrote it, I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah.
That choice.
So I mean, the way that prose just sparkles, it's like Alito probably wrote that. Like, they circulate different opinions, and then this was just like so beautiful. Like, we're going with Alito's version, right? That's what I think happened. Because it just rings with liberty and like the beauty of our country, right? That's how I'm interpreting it. Yeah, Jenny.
Do we have any hope that other countries are going to look at the United States now and say, look at that, they took down Roe and they will change their laws?
Well, I guess that's a political question, but to my way of thinking, America has bought all sorts of, brought contraception, and with our money, we've promoted a culture of death. And so now, if we get beyond that, in theory, like a President DeSantis, somebody could promote a culture of life around the world. That's.
I just wanted to say, we need to remember that God intervened here. It was God, He's sovereign. God intervened. He used all of us around the world
Yeah.
to pray or to do the footwork or whatever. But God intervened here, and I think He's speaking to His people, His children. Okay, come on, let's keep it up.
was thinking about this on the way back from Fargo today. Okay, so what's the next? Half of all abortions are chemical now, right? And so I did a little Google search on chemical abortion, and there's this great website by Students for Life, and they give all these stats about chemical abortion, and it's like a third of the women, they basically have Planned Parenthood and these people saying, you know, chemical abortion is perfectly safe if you're within like 3 minutes of a hospital. Because the stats are just like wildly unacceptable for the deaths and the complications and the bleeding from this. But they're just I mean, the lies just continue. So what we need to do is think about like how can we address chemical abortion? My idea was North Dakota legislature should pass a law that says if you ship in these chemicals and you hurt one of our women, then the damages, the money, the verdict money in your trial will start at $5 million.
Yeah.
Right? And then you just make it, just sue them out of existence, right? And then if there's like 10 states that adopt this, and you're in the business of selling chemicals for abortion, you got to think, you know, I send this to North Dakota, but it might end up in South Dakota, or it might end up in some state, and then we're on the hook, right? And so you just make their business model untenable. So I'm starting to think about that myself, and then there's lots of people who are way smarter and well versed in this. So I just think the spirit is just like, it's like awakened us, and it's like we've got a new breath of life. That's how I'm looking at the moment here.
So,
Tom?
so the less, probably the next strategy is what, hack the Supreme Court and try to change that. What do you think the odds of that are?
Yeah. Next strategy for the left. I'm almost convinced that there will be violent attacks on women's care centers, you know, different, and there will be bloodshed over this because this just destroys their view of the world. So that to me is the next thing.
Chaos.
The chaos. Well, and so yeah, they just don't have the votes to do anything in this Congress. So the next Congress, I mean, if they should somehow pull out a miracle and get a good working majority, then yeah, I think they'll try to pack the court. Absolutely. Right. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that, Tom?
I think that is the real strategy.
Yeah.
I hope
And when they whine about this, I mean, it's just really nice to have people that understand how off base their reasoning is. There is no reasoning. It's just like, well, we wanted this, and now we don't get it, and now we're gonna cry. You know, take our ball and go home. Like that's their argument. There is no argument. It's just all raw emotion is what's driving them.
We talked to someone in the Catholic Charities in Fargo, and they said they've tripled the amount of video cameras for their security. They've added some, you know, extra locks on their doors that you have to be buzzed.
That where, Jill?
Catholic Charities
Okay.
in Fargo.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
a lot of, I know churches are looking to, you know, lock up more and.
So I'm kind of hoping that, like, there's just so much hysteria about what the decision is. Like New York can still keep killing babies. They can kill them as much as they want. So when people realize we can still have abortion, maybe they'll calm down a little bit. It's just like these renegade states like North Dakota, you can't have abortion, then they don't care about us anyway, right? Tim?
I think these people know. One I read back in 1973, the reason that it even got to the Supreme Court is our gutless politicians didn't want to handle it. It was too hot.
Yeah.
So I'm sure these guys are thinking, if it comes back to the states, we're not going to have enough of a wave to, you know, to get our legislature to go along with it.
Well, if you look at the quality of the political debates, like you can't really have a fair fight if one side can say, well, the Constitution says we've got this right, and now the Constitution is on our side, and the Supreme Court is, that's an uphill fight, right? That's not a fair level playing field.
Right.
So now I think we can have some honesty in the debate. Like instead of all these euphemisms, we can just, you're killing a child. And there's even some people on the left who are saying, you know, this whole privacy ruse, this is like we're trying to pretend like there's this right to privacy, which Alito has demolished. There is no such thing, right? So now the left is saying, you know, sometimes we kill people. We kill criminals, we kill people, you know, that we don't like, and blah, 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 and we're killing babies. That's kind of, so I think that's a good move for us, for honesty, right? You can't build anything good on a lie, so maybe there will have less lies. in the debate.
Mike, I had a couple of comments. First of all, I think we're at the point where it highlights how important our local and state elections are now.
Yeah.
And that,
Yeah.
we really need to be educating ourselves in all of it, all of our local elections,
Yeah.
more than just voting for the president, because that vote in this particular instance doesn't matter as much anymore,
In
right?
addition, what's going to happen is that the politicians can no longer hide behind the ruling,
Right.
and they can be asked, you can ask them specifically, how do you vote
Yeah.
on pro-life issues, and they will have to actually tell you for once now.
Yeah, so that was going to be my other point, is that there are no politicians that can hide anymore behind a federal
Right.
law or a federal mandate.
Right. Not an issue. Yeah, it is an issue. Right.
So no matter what side of the aisle they're on,
Right.
they can't claim to be pro-life.
Which is good. I mean, less lying. Right?
And maybe we'll get away from reorganizing our language to suit those people.
Right. Right.
They
Exactly.
did everything but call it murder.
Right. Right. That's right, Tim. Joel?
And you hear a lot in the news, they're saying, and Dr. Louise might be able to talk about this, but they're claiming that Planned Parenthood is health care. And if you look, and somehow a pregnancy care center is not health care. And you guys just need to dispel that whenever you can, just to say, Planned Parenthood does very little in terms of health care. You guys can look up all the stats and stuff on that.
So, how many of you have ever heard of the Babylon Bee?
Yeah.
So this is a political satire website, right?
Yes.
And they had a piece just recently, it was like 2 months ago, that said, this is satire, so it's not literally true, but it is like everything in the Bible is true, and some of it actually happened. A deacon told me that once. Everything in the Bible is true, and some of it actually. So the satire is getting at a truth, right? And maybe the exact words aren't exactly true, but it said Planned Parenthood is getting into the business of promoting the transgender surgery operations, the transitioning for kids. Why? Because they want to mutilate children after they come out of the womb, just like they do before. Yes, that's exactly it. Right? It's like if you're a Democrat, you hear that, it's like, that's kind of like too close to home, right? That's exactly the point.
Maybe they want to let men have abortions too, not just women.
Exactly. You mean menstruating person?
Yes, excuse me.
Yeah.
I
Did you?
I wanted to jump on your comment, Mike, about how you fear that eventually we'll end up there'll be violence against pregnancy clinics.
Oh yeah.
And I think like just another action to be aware of is already, I mean, this was happening 4 or 5 years ago, and sometimes it's state by state, sometimes it's county by county, but they've created a legal definition of a limited service pregnancy clinic. So you fall under that definition, and your mission statement is narrowly focused on unplanned pregnancy, and if the only medical services you offer are pregnancy testing and ultrasound. And they're either really hassling places that fall under that definition, or in some cases making it illegal for them to operate in certain places. And the reasoning on their side is that if you equate abortion with health care, then a pregnancy clinic is slowing down a woman's access to health care by saying that we can't get a good ultrasound reading until 7 weeks LMP. Then that woman now will have a more expensive, riskier abortion because she's waiting to have the ultrasound at the pregnancy clinic. So just to be aware of that.
There's just no end to the way that the truth gets flipped on its head, right?
I think it's really important.
And so one way to dodge out of that is to expand your services.
Yeah.
Take the Planned Parenthood sales model where they're building relationships ahead of time through education, through STD testing, through contraception. But flip that. And what would it look like to make that polite?
Yeah, exactly.
What would it look like to teach fertility awareness? What would it look like to be in the schools and help with puberty education? Rather than making parents the idiots, make parents the experts.
There you go. I love that.
Yeah.
Good.
I think it's really important that we're brainstorming collectively as a group on how to support women that do find themselves in this position, right? Because there are women that legitimately find themselves in an unplanned pregnancy, and it is a crisis for them. and we need to have a solution for them. We can't just say, well, you can't get an abortion anymore, right? We have to have a solution for them. Otherwise, we're failing them, you know.
And they know that it's improved.
Yeah.
They know that. I was on a national webinar in December, and a woman who works in a pregnancy clinic had a girl call and say, I'm going to have an abortion, but I want to grieve well for the life of my child. So can I come to your pregnancy clinic and have an ultrasound so I can have a picture of my child before I terminate?
Sad.
Like, they know.
Yeah.
And so what is it? What's her fear? Why does she think she has to terminate?
Yeah.
And let's meet her there.
Yeah. Well, I promise this will be 10 minutes. We're way over that. So if any of you need to leave, just feel free. You've got permission to leave. Yeah.
I just want to say I appreciate you. I appreciate my husband. All the men who are participating in this. It's not just a woman's thing.
Yeah.
It's all of us for life.
Yeah.
And I appreciate all the men here too, who are, you know, we leave them out sometimes. It's just our thing. It's not. It's all of us.
Well, we don't do a whole lot right, but every once in a while. Right?